First and foremost is to start with resistant varieties. Unfortunately, at this time, we don't have things available on the market. They're coming. There have been reports of some varieties that are a little less susceptible. Matt's Wild Cherry was one last year that was reported. That information is up on the web. You can get some information about what's available. But there are some varieties coming. There's some work being done at universities and some of our seed companies to develop new varieties. So that's going to be an option. A couple of the first ones that will come out, Bijou Seeds has some. This comes out of Cornell and North Carolina State University's program. Here's Mountain Magic, which has stood up very well, and they have a plum variety. I know Johnny's is working on some. So we'll see some varieties with resistance in the future. That's going to be an option. There'll be limited seed next year, so if you're interested in resistant varieties, you're going to want to get a hold of seed as quickly as you can. Very important is to make sure you have certified potato seed, so there's a much lower chance that the pathogen is in that seed. You want to destroy cull potatoes because that's a real primary place where the pathogen overwinters. Make sure there's none in existence at the start of the next production season each year. Likewise, you want to control potato volunteers, primary place where the disease gets started every year, coming out of those infested tubers that didn't get harvested the year before. Controlling tomato volunteers and susceptible weeds is also important, not because they can be primary overwintering sources of the pathogen, but because they aren't being looked at and managed. They can be harboring the pathogen, and you don't see it because you're not looking at those on a regular basis. But if you've got a tomato volunteer you want to grow as a crop plant and you're going to manage it, that's a different story. So tomato volunteers, they can be really common. Here's one hiding down in my own garden peas. You've just got to be diligently out there looking for these volunteers and managing them if you're not going to grow them as a crop. Fortunately, there are not many plants that are hosts for the late blight pathogen. There are a couple important crops, also petunias sometimes, number of weeds. So not too many things to be out on the lookout for. Very important one last year that seemed to be an excellent host for these new strains is this bittersweet nightshade. You can see from a close-up of the symptoms, a very typical big late blight kind of a lesion. And this I found in my own backyard last year, which was a bit alarming. We don't see this weed too often in a farm situation where there's a lot of tillage going on, but in the landscape it is an extremely common weed. So that's a real concern that the pathogen can get multiplying on that weed. You want to scout regularly for late blight, as Sally pointed out. Another thing to do is to monitor reports of late blight so you know where it is occurring. Extension bulletins will have this information. There's a late blight report sheet up on Google Docs where anybody can log reports of where late blight's occurring. And you can see where reports have been so far this year. At Cornell, mostly focused on New York and the neighboring states, there is a listserv. This listserv also posts the updates on the web. You can get late blight updates. You can see what's happened in past years as well as this year. And Abby, who runs these, now has a listserv that's specifically for growers. So if you're interested in being on her listserv, if you're in that region, you can contact Abby and get on her listserv. And I show this page because it illustrates some important things about late blight. So here's a report from the 26th of September in 2006, and it shows you that there's no amount of late blight that's too little to report. So here we got a report of a single late blight lesion being found. This is an important disease. No amount is too little to report. And if you head further down that page, you'll see all the rest of the reports from 2006. Very few reports. That's a typical year in the Northeast. Very few reports of late blight. Sporadic disease. There is a forecast model that you can get off the web to see when conditions are favorable for late blight development. Here's a picture of the website. So you can see right now, at least on the 27th of June, reporting most areas pretty low conditions for disease. A couple areas where they're predicting that spores could be formed, infection was possible. Realize that this is strictly looking at environmental conditions and telling you when it's favorable for disease. It is not considering whether or not inoculum is there. So helpful to tell you when conditions are favorable. I think what's really particularly valuable about this site is the fact that this pathogen can infect when humidity is at least 90%. And often when we're thinking about diseases that need moist conditions, we're focusing on rain. And if it hasn't been raining, we're thinking no diseases. But with this pathogen, high humidity is enough. And to look back at this case in 2007, prior to that outbreak in August, there had been only 2 episodes of rain, and temperatures had been pretty high. We weren't thinking that much about late blight. So it illustrates high humidity is enough. Just 2 rain events you would think was late blight weather. And in fact, this grower had cut back on his sprays because he wasn't feeling like it was a disease weather. We've often thought about late blight as liking cooler temperatures, but notice what those August average temperatures were for us, average day temperatures of 82. This illustrates that the pathogen strains have changed a little bit, as I pointed out earlier, with late blight continuing to develop in Florida into May. It's tolerating these warmer temperatures. It's not our cool Irish potato famine pathogen anymore. Very important thing to keep in mind. Another illustration is that outbreak I mentioned to you that occurred last year, the end of August. If you look at the conditions in August that year, we hadn't even had an inch of rain prior to that outbreak. And once again, temperatures were fairly warm, definitely not thinking about diseases, and that's why this particular grower had stretched his spray intervals. As I mentioned before, it had been 10 days since he had sprayed. But if I went back in time and I looked, and on the 26th of August, almost a week prior to when we saw symptoms, just look at how many places conditions were favorable either for infection spores to be forming or infection possible. And actually that one little red dot that's right there, that's pretty much in the area of where this farm was. So this forecasting system can be really helpful for you to tell you when conditions are favorable, but realize if the pathogen's not there, you're not going to have disease. Next on the late blight management agenda here is to apply fungicides. As I pointed out to you, it can be really hard to control late blight if you wait until you've already got symptoms. Often you really have to be on a preventive schedule, unfortunately, when risk is high. Next step is, as Sally pointed out, there's lots of ways you can get your symptoms diagnosed. If you think you might have late blight, it's really important to get it diagnosed, not only to help you out, but because this is a community disease and we need to know where it's occurring.